Hello everybody, this is Michelle Fox and welcome back to The Simple Quilter. Today is the first episode in a series that's going to be titled Stash/Scrap Buster series. And in this series I'm going to be using my scraps or my stash to bust either or both of them. So in this series I'm going to be showing you how to do fun, fast, and easy quilts where you can use your scraps or your stash. Please don't forget to check out the So Many Quilty Things website listed below in the description. All of the t-shirts that I wear come from that site. And don't forget to use the coupon for 15% off all quilting and sewing apparel. This quilt behind me I've titled Stars and Stripes. This is a quilt that I've just come up with, and I'm going to show you how this project started. Now, to begin with, I want to tell you what inspired me or how I came up with this pattern. So this is a pattern that I did years ago. This is just a small lap-size quilt I made for my daughter, and I used the 10-inch squares from Missouri Start Quilt Company, and I used a honey bun, and I just put these strips on the diagonal. And I just put cornerstones and added a couple of borders. And that's what I was going to do with a bunch of 2.5-inch red, white, and blue strips. Well, and I put cream in there too. So my UFO, I had several of these blocks right here done. But then I decided I wanted to maybe put a star here, and so I figured out how to put that little star in my quilt, and then I started just playing with the layout. And I'll show you a couple of pictures of how I just started playing with the layout. And I just started putting those blocks up on my design wall. I just started putting those blocks up on my design wall and moving them around. And then I just came up with this quilt pattern. And it's really a neat quilt, because when you look at it one way you see one pattern, and when you look at it another way you see another pattern. But originally my UFO was this, but after I started playing with the design it ended up like this. I wanted to tell you that story because I wanted to show you how easy it can be to come up with your own quilt design. And it was so much fun to do. I loved it. I loved taking the blocks and moving them around on my design board until I came up with something that I really felt like was pleasing. And I am very excited about this quilt. Now, the quilt that I showed you that inspired this quilt, I love that quilt. And I would have liked it if I had just used just the cornerstones and put them all on the diagonal. But that one was kind of basic, as my husband would say. And this one is definitely extra, but it's just as easy to do as the first one. It takes a little bit more work and a little bit more time, but it is a fast and easy quilt to do. Now, the first thing I want to show you is how to make these blocks. Now, again, these were a UFO project that I started years and years ago. And I chose red, white, and blue, but you can do this in any color that you want. Now, for this quilt, I had a lot of 2.5-inch strips cut in the red, the cream, the red, and the blue. So I just used scraps that I had. And I cut them into different strips. For the center piece, I used 15-inch strips. For this blue and this red, I cut 13-inch strips. And I alternated them. On one side I did blue, and on the other side I did red. And then these two, this blue and this red, I just had cut a bunch of 9-inch strips. And then these pieces I used cream and white, and those were 6-inch pieces. Now you will waste some fabric, but again, all the waste I put into my dog bed system. You do have to have 10-inch foundation squares. You can order these from Missouri Star Quilt Company. I believe Fat Quarter Shop also makes them. And this is how I started with my quilt block. I took the 15-inch strips and I folded them in half, and I just made a little crease on both ends. Just a finger press. You don't need to get your iron out for this. Then I took fabric glue, and this is fabric glue, and I just ran a strip from one corner to the next, just like this. From corner to corner. Then I just tried to line this little line that I had. I just tried to line it up with that corner. And then you just smooth it down just like that. And that's how I started the block. Now, it was important for me to try to have them pretty much in the center. Now, this is not a perfect system, but my layout doesn't call for the strips to be perfect. But again, all of my strips are 2.5 inches, and they're all different shades of red, white, and blue. So, I have that strip down. Then I just laid a red strip right on top of that, and these are my 13-inch pieces. All right, and I sewed a 1/4 of an inch seam right down there. Just like this. Just like this. Then I opened this up, and I simply pressed it open. When you're using the foundation paper, you do not want to use steam because it causes this to wrinkle up. Or anyway, that's what I found. So, you just are going to set that seam. And this is just my miniature aliso. You're going to open that up, and you're just going to press it. Then you're going to take your blue piece, and you're going to lay it down there, and you're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam, and you're going to press that open. You're going to put a white or cream piece there, do your seam, and press it open to cover the last square. Now on this side for my quilt, I started on this side with a blue piece. Sewed that down and then pressed it open. And then I added a red piece, I sewed that seam, pressed it open, and then I finished with a white or a cream piece on the end. Now, when you have all of the pieces sewn on, your block should look something like this. Then you're going to want to trim it down to a 10-inch square. Now, the paper foundation pieces will shrink up just a little bit. So don't just trim at the edge of those papers. You really need to be sure you're trimming a 10-inch square. All right? So then I just go up and over, making sure that I'm going to have a full 10-inch square. Okay, so there you have it. Now, a couple of tips when you are sewing onto the foundation paper. You can use a larger needle and a smaller stitch length, and then these just pull right off. You can just see how easy those pull off, and you want to be sure to remove all of these pieces. And you can see how easy those come apart and come off of there. Now, when I'm finished, then and I've pressed this good, I do an 1/8 of an inch stay stitch all around the edge to help prevent this from stretching. And you have to be extremely careful when handling these blocks, because all of these edge pieces are on the bias, and you will distort your blocks if you don't handle them carefully. And I actually have distorted them just a little bit, so I'm having to be extra careful. But here you can see I've done a little stay stitch all around the edge. For those of you who might want to know how many pieces I used, I cut 42 15-inch strips with the white and the cream. And this was my centerpiece. The reason I cut 42 2.5-inch strips was because I have 42 blocks in my quilt. And then for this blue, which is 13 inches, I cut 42 of these in the blue, and I cut 42 in different shades of red in the blue. And I did the same thing with the 6-inch strips. So I cut 42 red and 42 blue. And then these last pieces, I cut a total of 84 strips in the 84 6-inch strips in the white and the off-white. Be sure you review the materials in the instructions below, because sometimes I make errors that I don't catch when I edit my videos, but for the number of strips you'll need, that be sure to check the description below. Okay, so that's how you make these pieced units. And again, you can use any size you want. You don't have to do the white strips, but if you want to do it and have the pattern show up like what I've done in the quilt that was behind me, you need to do it like this. And you need to, if you're going to do patriotic, you need to do these red and these blue, and then alternate those, because that's what helps create the secondary pattern in this quilt. So for the sashings for this quilt, you are going to need 22 strip pieces, sashing strips that look like this with 2 triangles on the end, and you are going to need 49 strips with triangles on both ends. And I'm going to show you how to make those strips. The first thing you're going to need is you're going to need a 2.5 by 10-inch strip. And for my quilt, I needed 71 of these. You are also going to need 240 1.5-inch squares for this, for the strip, for the sashing. You're also going to need 30 2.5-inch red squares, or I used red. Again, you can use whatever colors you want. So let me show you how I'm going to make these strips. Again, you're going to need 71 2.5 by 10-inch strips, and you're going to need 240 of these little 1.5-inch squares. Okay, now on all your little squares, you're going to have to draw a little line. So you just take your little block, you lay your ruler down corner to corner, and you just mark a little white line. Whoops. And you just mark a white line, just like that. And you're going to do all of them just like that. You're going to take one little square and you're going to lay it on your 2.5-inch strip in the corner, just like this, so that the line's going from corner to corner. And you're just going to pin that in place. and you're just going to sew on that line or just right to the inside of that line, just like this. Okay. Then you're going to take your ruler and you're going to just trim off 1/4 of an inch. And you're simply going to take that to the iron and you're going to press that. So you should have a strip that looks like this. Then you're going to take a second square and you're going to put it from this corner to that corner. Now you do need to be careful when positioning this. Be sure you're positioning it and lining it up with the white fabric. You're going to sew on that line just like that. There's one seam. And then again, you're going to take your ruler and you're going to trim that down and press it open. Okay, so again, you're going to need 22 that look like this, and you're going to need 49 that have the triangles on both ends. Now this is where the fun starts. If you put all the blue pieces in towards the middle, you create a secondary pattern. If you do it just like I've done it. Now you don't have to do it like this. You don't even have to do the stars. If you don't do the stars, then it's not going to take near as long to do. But I really like the stars. Now I'm going to say that this is the edge of the quilt and this is the bottom of the quilt. So I only need to use the strips that have the triangles at one end. And there's triangles here because those are going to connect with more blocks. But I just thought that was really neat. Now you could do red. Maybe you want the squares to be red. Maybe you want to alternate them like I did. Some were like this, some were blue, but you can alternate those. This quilt was so fun and easy to make. I was so excited to see what the design turned out to be once I played with those blocks some. And the quilt behind me that's on my design wall is a little bit more than half of the quilt. This quilt was super fun and super easy for me, and it took my basic UFO and turned it into what I think is an extraordinary quilt. This is a great quilt for using patriotic colors, or you can use any color that you have in your stash. If you've enjoyed today's video, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't, share with a friend, and as always, please leave a comment. I love to get the comments. It's one of my favorite parts of making the YouTube videos, and I try to respond to each and every one. So until next time, have fun quilting.